Sexual encounters, violence, an alleged six-figure hush payment. Those are just some of the highlights from today's testimony in Sean Diddy Combs' federal trial. Jurors were shown damning receipts, hotel records, videos, all in an effort to show a disturbing picture of alleged abuse and cover-ups. But the defense isn't backing down, arguing Cassie Ventura, the star witness in this case, wasn't a victim, she was a willing participant. We're going to be breaking all this down, what happened today in court, with Law&Crime's in-court reporter, Elizabeth Millner. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, the federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs took yet another turn today. More evidence presented for the jury to consider. We're talking explicit videos, text messages, apparently arranging sexual encounters, details of a, $100,000 payment allegedly made to cover up a violent altercation. The defense fought back aggressively, highlighting missing messages, arguing his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura Fine, alleged victim number one in this case, that she willingly participated in these encounters, that this is not sex trafficking. And as the prosecution prepares to rest its case, the question remains, will this mountain of evidence be enough to actually convict the music mogul of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution? Well, to help break all this down, I want to bring on Law&Crime's in-court reporter, Elizabeth Millner, who's been in that courtroom every day for every piece of testimony, including what happened today. Elizabeth, always great to see you. So, before we even talk about the testimony, a lot of preliminary issues about a juror or jurors, and also, is there something going on about a leak? Talk to us about these kind of issues before we even get into the testimony.
Yeah, well, court started a little bit earlier this morning. Normally it starts for the parties as well as us around 8:30 before the jury comes in around 8:45 and they begin testimony kind of around the 9 o'clock time frame. But bright and early this morning, the judge gets on the bench and his demeanor, Jesse, is a little bit different than normal. He seems really kind of annoyed or kind of ticked off about something. And so what we did learn is that he was upset about this particular article that came out. Now, he was very tight-lipped as far as what media organization kind of released this article. We all kind of have our assumptions about what the article entailed, and it was a recent article that came out just about a jury issue. And the reason this is such a big deal, and just for everybody who's kind of for everybody who wants to know more about it, why it's such a big deal, it's because on Friday all of us were taken outside of the courtroom so that way they could have a sealed courtroom so that way they could talk about a particular issue. Now, at the time, we didn't know what this issue was, but we knew that it was kind of big enough for them to seal the courtroom down. Diddy was still inside the courtroom. Both parties were inside that courtroom, but all of the public, the court sketch artists, us and the press, we all had to leave for about a 20-minute time period, and then we were all let back inside. But we didn't know what this conversation was. But we believe it might pertain to this article that was released just this week about a juror getting a text message from a juror getting a text message from somebody asking them if they were juror number 6. And as we all know, and as we've all been following this case, we know that juror number 6 was the one who was ultimately dismissed from the case just this week. But the question is, who was the source that revealed to the media organization what had happened during this, what was supposed to be a closed proceeding? So the judge gets on the bench this morning and he says pretty much that somebody had spilled the beans. So he kind of confronts Maureen Comey, who is kind of lead counsel for the prosecution, and Mark Agnifilo, who is the lead counsel for the defense, kind of wondering who was the source of the leak. Now, both sides denied that they had any leaks coming from either respective camp about who gave this information to the media organization, who then released this in an article. And so the defense says they recently became aware of this leak, of this article that came out, and then obviously the prosecution was adamant that the leak didn't come from their camp. So the judge was kind of like, when he was on the bench, well, somebody's lying to me. It had to come from somebody because this courtroom was shut down. There was nobody in there except officials and doing official business. And so he said that somebody did violate the court sealing order, and then he said that he told Maureen Comey and Mark Agnifilo, again, prosecution and defense, that they're kind of on notice and that they should try to kind of find the source of the leak if it comes from their camp, and that the most extreme kind of action that he could possibly take, because he was taking this matter very seriously, Jesse, where he said the most extreme action that he could take was just a criminal contempt charges. But the thing is, nobody knows who this source is. But honestly, Jesse, I think what the biggest thing is, and kind of the biggest mystery that we all walked away from being in court today was who was kind of the source of this leak and possibly what kind of will end up happening in terms of any action that is taken by the judge. So that kind of remains a mystery. But what we do know is it has something to possibly do with the jurors, something. And I say that very lightly.
Hey everybody, this is a Law and Crime legal alert. Did you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? And the research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to all this? Yeah, well, Morgan & Morgan, they're stepping in to fight to hold these food companies accountable. With decades of experience fighting large corporations, they are ready to stand up for the families who deserve justice. So if your child under 21 has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or fatty liver disease, then visit www.forthepeople.com/food or scan the QR code on screen to learn more. By the way, real quick, we got a lot of questions today on Law and Crime's live lunch show. We do it every day. A lot of people were wondering whether or not the whole dynamic of the jury is different, the vibe is different after one of the jurors was dismissed and replaced with an alternate. Have you seen anything like it? I think you even said to me today the alternate juror, you know, might have been looking at some of the video material a little bit differently, right?
Yeah, so I think from what I can tell of the jury that it didn't seem like they had much of a big demeanor change in terms of them losing kind of one of their own, and that obviously being juror number 6, who was dismissed from the case just yesterday. But as far as I could tell, even from the alternate who replaced that juror, kind of at the tail end of just the number lines there, that I think that, you know, he's been following this case since the beginning, as all the alternates have. They've been following this case, they've been seeing the exact same exhibits, they've been listening to the testimony just as well as the other jurors have been. And so from what I could tell, especially as they were listening or watching the freak off videos today, that I could tell that it might have made them just a little uncomfortable, right? Because who wants to watch these types of videos in open court? And then as they're digesting it, surprisingly, they all kept a pretty straight face. But I will say from that alternate juror who now kind of is in the main jury group, I should say, that I will say that it seemed like he was taking the headphones off pretty quickly. I think, you know, the freak off videos and the sexually explicit videos might have been a little bit too much, especially for the morning time for these jurors to watch.
Understandable. Understandable. I get it. All right, let's move on to witness testimony. So the only witness of the day today, right? Only witness was Special Agent and correct me if I'm mispronouncing her name, Alyssa Penland from the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York, continued her testimony from yesterday. One of these summary witnesses, when you have a voluminous amount of material, digital material, so video, text, sometimes you need a witness to kind of condense it, summarize it, give an overview of what it is, pick out the big parts into these charts, right? These summary charts. And one of the things that she testified to was the jury saw records for an escort named Jules, right? So what did we learn about Jules? What did those records show?
Well, for all the viewers who have been following the case, we know that Jules was the escort that was used, or that was also there during the Intercontinental Hotel incident in March of 2016. But as we've all been following this case, we know that Jules was somebody that Cassie and Diddy used kind of frequently in terms of their freak-offs. And so what we did see was just some more records and summary charts, which isn't the most exciting stuff. But I think it's pretty interesting in terms of, you know, the government really just kind of putting all the puzzle pieces really together in an organized chart, so that way the jurors can kind of be like, oh, we see this connects with this, this, and this. And so we saw an exhibit of that flight summary chart, specifically from dates including August 26th of 2009. So going back in time a little bit here to kind of the beginning stages of Cassie and Diddy's relationship, through August 28th of 2009. So they traveled, or the reservation was for a London hotel here in New York City. The names under it were Cassie, Sean Combs, and then Jules Theodore, aka Jules, aka the escort that Cassie and Diddy had used pretty often. And so what we did see was some flight records for Jules Theodore from LAX to JFK on August 26th of 2009, and then from JFK back to LAX on August 28th of 2009. And so what I think the government did pretty well is kind of connect the dots to even just things like the charges made on the American Express statement that the account holder was for Sean Combs. And so these dates range from the American Express statement that we saw as an exhibit was from August 26th of 2009 to August 29th of 2009. So again, those same time frames where we saw charges to the London hotel. The arrival was for August of 26th of that year, and the departure date was August 29th of that year. We saw a charge for Virgin America, the airline, for $419.61. We saw a charge to the travel agency, and that being a $50 charge. We saw a charge for even a limo service around this time frame for $227.70. And then we saw another charge to American Airlines, presumably for the flight home, I think it was, for $419.60. And of course, that account holder being registered to Sean Combs. And so we saw the ending balance for that month, that being again August of 2009 for Sean Combs's American Express statement, and it was a lot of money. It was $218,353. So it was just a lot of money, kind of nearing in that $250,000 range as far as just a credit card statement just for the month of August of 2009. And then we saw some corresponding text messages too from that same time frame where Cassie writes to Jules, "Hey, how are you? Give me a call when you get this." Jules responds, "Did you two leave?" Cassie says, "Here's your booking locator." And then she sent kind of all the information as far as the flight goes. And then Jules said, "Thank you." Cassie says, "Have a safe flight." And then Jules responds, "Thank you and happy B-Day." And so there were just some more kind of similar summaries that the jury was able to see that really kind of connects the dots between the flight summaries to the American Express statement charges, and then even just the corresponding account numbers that kind of went into paying off that particular American Express statement, as well as records from the hotel, and then notes attached from the hotel reservation. Yeah. So really kind of taking it piece by piece by piece. And I understand, charts aren't the most exciting thing, but it really makes a lot of sense when you kind of put it into the full context.
I think they're so important. If you're trying to prove transportation to engage in prostitution, right? Transporting sex workers and alleged victims for the purposes of sex work, this is exactly the kind of evidence that you need. Transporting people, right? Transporting sex workers, alleged victims, it's also part of sex trafficking. There is a commercial element to that, right? There is a travel component to that. So the payment receipts, the credit cards, the travel records, these are all so important. They're granular, they're specific, they're data-driven, but they are so important in proving these charges. What about this hotel stay for someone named Dave? How was that booked?
So it looked very similar, honestly, to Jules's kind of records too, where we saw the flight summary exhibit, those for the dates of September 15th of 2014 through September 17th of 2014. And so we saw that the reservation was at the Four Seasons Hotel in Los Angeles. So instead of New York City, it was in Los Angeles, and the reservation name was for a person named Eli Maroon. And what we know about Eli Maroon is that he's one of Diddy's assistants. And so the names kind of corresponding with this particular time frame were Sean Combs and Clayton Howard, aka Dave. Now, what kind of stood out to me, honestly, Jesse, was that Cassie's name wasn't in this kind of list of names. But then I kind of thought about it around this time frame that they wouldn't need to fly her out, mainly because she already lives in Los Angeles around this time frame, or also possibly that it wasn't her in this hotel room. So you could really kind of see it both ways, but really just the names that we saw attached to it were Sean Combs and Clayton Howard, aka Dave. And so the flight records were for Clayton Howard from JFK to LAX on September 15th of 2014, and then from LAX back to JFK on September 17th of 2014. So just departing just a couple days later. Then we see a charge, or the American Express statement charges for the Four Seasons Hotel around September 15th of 2014. And then we also see a charge for Journey Corp Travel Agency for $50. So that is the travel agency that's been used to kind of help book a number of flights or hotels too. And so then we see an exhibit of 5 different bank accounts that helped paid off this American Express card statement. And the accounts were assigned to Combs Enterprise, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Productions, Finance Department. And then we see the records from the Four Seasons Hotel, where the reservation, again, being under Eli Maroon. The arrival date was for September 15th of 2014, the departure date being September 17th of 2014, and the room rate being about $495. We see a payment for American Express with the account number that's assigned to the cards that Diddy had. And then we see the contact name under this particular reservation, or this hotel record, I should say, from Christina Coram. And so just another thing that's kind of attaching her. So it's kind of pretty sad that we're not seeing her being called as a government witness per se, or possibly even a witness altogether. We just have to wait and see. But under the reservation notes for the Four Seasons Hotel, it says Mr. Eli Maroon asked for a room to be added to his reservation. And then we see a travel invoice for Bad Boy Entertainment, and the passenger being Clayton Howard, aka Dave. So again, these are just some of kind of the way that the government was presenting these types of summary charts, where it's really just the flight summary chart, kind of putting it all together, and then really taking it again piece by piece, really connecting the flights, because the defense can really be like, okay, well, how do we know that the people there were actually there at this specific time frame? And so they, they did what they could under cross-examination. I know we'll talk about that later, but in terms of just what the government was doing, I feel like they kind of did a pretty good job in really just putting it all together and really kind of laying it out in a very kind of layman's type of way, so that way we could all kind of understand, and it clicks right there.
Right, because when Cassie testified or Jane testified, they would talk about alleged sex workers being transported to X, Y, and Z. This obviously corroborates their testimony, but now you can actually, exactly like you said, you can pinpoint it. You can link Sean Combs, you can link the money, you can link the travel, and that is key here. That is key. So it was introduced by the alleged victims, and now they're really trying to finalize it and really make it crystal clear for the jury. One of the things that came up a lot during the course of this case, even from the very beginning, was about the damage to hotel rooms, right? These freak-off events, how elaborate they are, how intense they were. There were records about hotel damage fees, right? Those were shown to the jury as well. What did we learn about that?
Yeah, so what we did learn is that there were hotel invoices, hotel records, just more documents that were shown today. So for example, we saw one hotel invoice for Phil Pines. What we know about Phil Pines is that although he wasn't someone that was called to testify that we know of, he is somebody that we do know used to be Sean Combs' assistant. And so we saw that hotel invoice under Phil Pines' name, but a charge for $500 because of damage to drapes, something that's been testified to even previously. But we also saw another exhibit, that being a hotel invoice for L'Hermitage Hotel, and then it was a $1,700 charge for linen damage, but I think they ended up taking away that $700, so it ended up just being a $1,000 charge. But the hotel was booked under a Mr. Ryan Lopez. What do we know about Mr. Ryan Lopez is that he's also somebody that used to be Diddy's assistant. And so then we kind of see around this time frame, just again, those American Express statements that really kind of showed, or the government was able to show that this American Express statement also paid off some of these damages, including the damage for drapes or the damages for the linens. And so even though they didn't happen around the same time frame, the government was able to kind of really show with this particular witness that these charges were paid off using the American Express.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a conversation about the 2016 event, right? The infamous 2016 event, yes. Arguably the most important evidence in this case, because it helps to prove a pattern of abuse towards women. It helps to prove sex trafficking. This is where Cassie was seen on tape being beaten by Sean Combs. She claims she was leaving a freak off when this happened. You see her dragging her back towards that room. We've already heard testimony about Sean Combs allegedly bribing a hotel security officer so that video would never see the light of day. But now we get the records, and now we get the text messages, right? The text messages all surrounding that event and the flurry of activity that surrounded that event. What did we learn?
Yeah, so it was presented under kind of a different exhibit as opposed to the flight summary charts, right? It was presented kind of in a way as just a timeline where we were able to see just calls that were made, text messages that were sent. If a voicemail happened, we were able to see that. We were able to see if there were images sent with text messages. So they really kind of just laid it all out there. And while there were some messages that we've already seen, it was really kind of nice to have it all just lumped together in terms of just how the events all occurred, especially on that specific day. So it really kind of, they brought it back to March 4th of 2016, where you see Diddy calling Cassie at 6:04 p.m. That was when he initiated communication that day, and that Cassie had called Diddy at 6:05 p.m. Then we see a message from Garen to Cassie, Garen being somebody that Cassie used for Cowboys for Angels to kind of coordinate and get the escorts to these hotels or wherever their freak-offs would occur, where Garen writes to her, "Fun tonight? question mark, and that's at 6:21. Cassie responds, yes, LA. Then Garen responds, Mr. Schuyler. Cassie responds, yes, but anyone knew. Then Diddy calls Cassie at 6:39 p.m. That call wasn't answered. Then Cassie writes to Garen, okay, can you put him on notice? It might be 7:30. Just Schuyler is good. Then Diddy calls Cassie about 3 different times at 7:48 p.m., 7:49 p.m., 7:51 p.m. Then Schuyler texts Cassie where he said, hey, you smiley face, I can be there around 10:30 or 11 p.m. Diddy calls Cassie 3 more times. There was no answer. Schuyler writes to Cassie, what time and where would you like to meet? Then Cassie responds to Schuyler, okay, can you do 3 a.m.? So then we get to the next day, that being March 5th, where Schuyler writes to Cassie, I know you're doing a good job. I wanted to say keep it up. I'm going to lay my head down. Then Diddy calls Cassie. It wasn't answered. And that's between 11:28 a.m. to 11:35 a.m. on March 5th. And then we see photos of Cassie's bruises. And again, these were the ones that she had testified to that she took in the back of the Uber. She's wearing sunglasses. But she says by that point, what had happened at the Intercontinental Hotel as far as the assault goes had already occurred because she is covering up one of the black eyes. So we're able to see that image once again on this timeline. Then what we see again from March 5th of 2016 is Diddy calling Cassie a few times. Diddy then texts her saying, call now. Cassie texts Diddy, I went and checked everything and spoke to security. Jules left, so you're good. Diddy responds to Cassie, call me now. And then some time goes by. And then he writes back, cops are here. Diddy calls Cassie 3 more times. Then Cassie calls D-Rock. Diddy texts Cassie, so you're going to abandon me? And then some time goes by. Then he says, call me, please. Cassie texts Diddy, I have a premiere on Monday for the biggest thing I've ever done. I have a black eye and fat lip. You're sick for thinking what you've done is okay. Please stay far away from me. And obviously she said more things, but I was trying to write down everything as fast as I could. But again, it's one of the messages that we've already seen in this case before, but now it's kind of laid out in just a timeline and sequence of events. And so then afterwards, Diddy calls Cassie a bunch of times. Then D-Rock calls Cassie. Then Christina Coram calls Cassie, kind of again going to what Cassie had testified, where she just got a bunch of calls from all these different people trying to get a hold of her. Then we see that Diddy had texted Cassie, if you don't pick up, you'll never hear my voice again. And then Diddy writes, I'm getting arrested. Diddy calls Cassie 4 more times between 1:05 p.m. that day and 11:26 p.m. Then we see Christina Coram text Eli Maroon, what room is he in? And that happens at 1:09 p.m. Then D-Rock texts Christina Coram, is Puff at the house? Cassie then calls D-Rock a few times. The calls connect, but only for just a short time period. Then D-Rock messages Christina Coram, I'm in the car headed to you. Then Cassie texts Christina Coram, can you please tell him the neighbors are about to call the police? And remember, if you kind of go back to her testimony where she had said she finally got home, then there was kind of just a commotion that happened over at her place. And then they believed that the neighbors had called the police because of just what they were hearing as kind of a noise disturbance type of thing. And so then D-Rock writes to Christina Coram, tell him that he needs to get out of there. And Christina Coram writes to Cassie, sorry, urgent, please call me back. I got him, we're leaving. Then Cassie writes to Christina Coram, thank you, please take away any keys that he has. So at 3:27 p.m. that day, Christina Coram writes to Cassie, talk to him. He promised he won't go back over if you just talk to him for 5 minutes. And then a couple, time goes by a little bit here. And then Christina Coram also writes to Cassie, sorry, don't want to be in the middle. Just want to make sure he doesn't go over there. And so, while, on its face, it doesn't seem like it's a lot, but because we've seen these messages before. But again, it's really just kind of laying out just everything that had happened. And I think also what was interesting, Jesse, is that they really kind of started laying out the sequence of events in terms of just Eddie Garcia's role and what had happened after the Intercontinental Hotel incident too. And as we all know from his testimony, that he was the one who gave the video of he gave the surveillance video to Diddy for a price, and a pretty hefty price too, that being about 6 figures.
Let's talk about that, because yes, Coram had texted Combs' assistant, I'm going to just ask to cover damages. Combs wants to speak to the Spanish security guard. And then, I think the message from Christina Coram, say they had a fun, drunk night to get more information. It goes to this idea of racketeering. It goes to this idea that Sean Combs allegedly used his assistants, his inner circle, his businesses to not only pay for all of these kind of hotel nights or Wild King nights or freak-offs, whatever you want to call them, but that he was using them, this is the allegation, to cover up crimes, to commit crimes and cover up crimes. If the jury accepts that these nights, these freak-offs were evidence of sex trafficking, that they're crimes, and you have the assistants who are facilitating them and then covering up the aftermath of them, that's how you get to racketeering. And that includes the what? $100,000 alleged payment for security footage? What did we learn today about that? Because we already heard about it from Eddie Garcia.
Well, in addition to the messages that you just read, too, we saw a message from Eli Maroon to Christina Quorum also saying, you know, after Christina Quorum told Eli to just say that they had a fun, drunk night, that Eli responded, LOL, no shot, they aren't playing nice. And so then we see some more messages from Christina Quorum to Eli Maroon where she is saying, did you get security number? PD is asking. PD also being Sean Combs, a.k.a. P. Diddy, a.k.a. Diddy. And then Eli responds to Christina Quorum, wouldn't give it to me. Then Christina goes, okay, well, what's Eddie's last name? Then we see the next day of the timeline, that being March 6th of 2016, where we see text photos, where we see text messages and then photos kind of accompanying these messages of Carrie Morgan and D-Rock, I think at Cassie's condo, where she was after this incident happened, where Diddy messages D-Rock, how is she? And D-Rock responds, she's good. She's eating breakfast. Her face don't look bad. She's good. Call her. She's smiling and laughing with yum. And then we start to get into the messages with Eddie Garcia, and those being the messages the day after on March 7th of 2016. So we see a text from Cassie to Diddy where she says, I wish I could crawl into bed until I look better. Then we see the number of calls between Eddie Garcia and Diddy between 11:03 a.m. on March 7th to 1:22 p.m. on that same day. Then we see some more calls that were made from 1:25 p.m. to 2:02 p.m. So just a lot of calls that we were seeing. And then the government kind of showed in their timeline Eddie Garcia's driver's license and then the text messages that accompanied that, as well as kind of messages from Cassie to Carrie Morgan, her best friend at the time, where she said, I should have sued, LOL. And then Carrie Morgan responds, totally. Then at 6:31 p.m., there's photos of Cassie and Diddy at her movie premiere. And then we see a bunch of calls that are placed between Eddie Garcia and Diddy on March 8th of 2016, on March 9th of 2016, and going all the way into March 25th of 2016. So really got to see, we've heard Eddie Garcia's testimony, right? We've also heard a little bit from Cassie just as far as, what she thought might have happened with the surveillance video, that type of thing, but really kind of seeing it all just mapped out in terms of just like the way the night was supposed to start to the way everything ultimately ended. I think the government did a pretty good job in just laying it all the way out there. But, when cross-examination happens, we know that there is a lot of kind of holes poked into the timeline that was made by the government pretty much.
Yeah, but this evidence definitely corroborates Eddie Garcia's account. And remember, bribery, one of the underlying crimes, predicate acts of racketeering. Prosecution has to prove at least two. There's forced labor, there's arson, there's drug offenses, there's bribery. This always felt to me like one of the more digestible, concrete examples, and perhaps the jury will find that and find that Sean Combs engaged in bribery and was working with others to engage in bribery. These records definitely help that case. So let's talk a little bit about cross-examination. They were focusing, in my opinion, and I'm curious if you can elaborate, it seems like they were saying, hey, guess what? You presented a lot for this jury. There's a lot of messages missing from your charts, though. Isn't that strange? A lot of messages missing from your chart. Messages that were quite helpful to the defense's case, right?
Yes. And honestly, there were times, Jesse, during this cross-examination, I thought, okay, are they thinking that this special agent is Cassie Ventura? Because it felt like they were just really repeating the text messages, the video exhibits in terms of just what I think they wanted to do during the cross-examination of Cassie Ventura, but they were able to get it all in under Special Agent Alyssa Penland. And so right off the bat during this cross-examination conducted by Tenny Garagos, they being the defense, asked about the duties of a special agent versus the duties of a paralegal specialist. Because if everyone remembers, yesterday we had one of the summary witnesses for the government be a paralegal specialist, and I think they were trying to compare and contrast the duties of Special Agent Alyssa Penland versus the paralegal specialist who had testified yesterday. And so Alyssa Penland had testified that the duties between a special agent are that they serve subpoenas, they investigate, whereas a paralegal specialist kind of helps get everything in terms of preparation with documents kind of all in order. later. But her duties in this case wasn't really to investigate. It was really to just review the charts for accuracy. She had testified to that multiple times, and then just all the exhibits that were used in particular were just something that the government, the trial team specifically, wanted to use in this particular exhibit. And so I think the defense was kind of like, okay, well, why weren't some dates included? Why weren't some messages included? Those types of things. And so the defense brings up one row, which just had Sean Combs' name in it, not Cassie's name attached to this too, where it was from December 2015. It was a stay at the L'Ermitage Hotel, and that was where there was kind of damage to that particular room, and then the booking was under Diddy's assistant, that being Ryan Lopez. Then the defense brings up text messages between Christina Coram and Eli Maroon, where Christina Coram is like, okay, well, they are both out. That's what she said in the text message. And then the defense was kind of like, okay, well, who is they? Why didn't you investigate who they was? Because the only name that they saw in that particular row on that flight chart was just Sean Combs' name. However, around this time frame, Cassie was in South Africa shooting her movie, something that we've heard about kind of ad nauseum before. And so Penland said that, again, her job wasn't to conduct an investigation in this case. It was really just to review these charts for accuracy. But then Tenny Garagos is like, okay, well, did you ask to look at the records of where Miss Ventura was in December of 2015? Penland responds no. And then Penland also later says, it's clear someone else was there, but we just don't know who it was also in that room. As Christina Coram wrote to Eli Maroon, they are out. And so then Tenny Garagos goes, well, it's important to accurately present the data, right? Did you ask yourself who else is in the room? And then Penland responds, well, I was able to review what was provided by the trial team. Again, this was something that she wasn't just picking these dates and these text messages just to do so. It was something that was provided to her by the trial team and something that she had testified to under direct too. So then the defense kind of brings up just these time jumps that we saw in this particular summary chart from May of 2015. And then the next one that we see on that chart was October of 2015. And the defense asked if Penland had reviewed any of flights from August of that year. They also bring up that there was no hotel records associated with New Year's Eve of 2016, that New Year's Eve going into 2017, and then how the last page on the chart ends on June of 2017, that specifically being June 9th through June 11th of 2017, where Penland explains that that's the last entry. But we know that there's been just kind of more bookings and flights even after that time frame. But the defense brings up the text where Cassie is starting to say that she's ready to freak off, and that was back in 2009. And that's where I kind of say that it felt like they were trying to re-examine Cassie Ventura under cross, but they were using Alyssa Penland to do it, because really what we saw were just a lot of text messages that, yes, we've seen before, but it seems like these were ones that they wanted to ask Cassie Ventura possibly while she was on the stand. So there were a lot of times I was kind of scratching my head while I was in the gallery, kind of like, well, where are they going with this? And kind of what is the point of showing all of this stuff? Because there was an email in particular that wasn't included in the chart. It was between Cassie and Diddy in August of 2009, August 7th of 2009. And then the defense brings up the London hotel records from 2009 and whether or not Alyssa Penland reviewed those specific records attached to the hotel. Then they kind of go into April 4th of 2010, where the chart goes from 2010 to 2012. So then did Alyssa Penland testify that the charts indicates, based on evidence cited in the chart, the individuals were at these particular gatherings. And so the defense then brings up just kind of a lot of text messages about Cassie wanting to do freak-offs. Then they played the freak-off videos. And during this particular time frame, or when they were playing the freak-off videos, what they did was they shut off the exhibit monitor for the gallery and the overflow room. So we weren't able to see what was kind of going on. We were barely able to hear what was going on too, because all the jurors and then both parties are wearing headphones. Even the judge and the judge's clerk are wearing headphones. And the jury was able to see the freak-off tapes once again. And then I was kind of like, okay, well, why are they showing these particular videos to somebody who just made, flight summary charts? I would think that would be something maybe the government was using in order to kind of prove that the escort was there, but then the defense used. And that's why I kind of bring up that it felt like they were just putting all this information about Cassie back in the jury's minds in terms of just her demeanor during these freak-offs too.
What did they ask Penland about those videos?
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like, I thought they were going to be asking her questions in between, but they were really just like, okay, it goes from this time code to this time code, right? And then they played it and they played it. And it was just like a moment where we were thinking, okay, are there going to be questions kind of associated with it? And that's where I kind of just stopped writing things down, because it really felt like we were in the room of silence for like 30 minutes.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think what they were trying to do was, in a sense, to say, hey, look at all these messages from Cassie to say that she was a willing participant, right? You have a message, I keep having sexy flashbacks of yesterday. One where she writes, I promise I will be the nastier freak bee to make up for it, right? These kinds of messages. And then, I don't know what's on these tapes. I have no idea what's on these tapes. But I imagine if the videos, and I hate to say it, if the videos are showing her excited or enthusiastic or saying or doing things, and you couple that with the messages, is it trying to give the jury a more streamlined view that she was a willing participant, that this was consensual, that this was not sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion? Would I be totally off by thinking that?
No, not at all, because once we all returned kind of from the lunch break, we were able to see more text messages where Diddy is talking about Cassie coming to New York and how he wanted to see a Broadway play. And then this being October 12th of 2012, where Diddy says, FYI, effing David hit me. And then Diddy says, is coming to New York City this weekend, the RT move. And I think he meant the right move. And then Diddy texted Cassie that he has tickets to Book of Mormon. So I think they were just kind of trying to introduce that, but then also kind of say that Cassie was looking at a lounge membership for, I think, like one of those adults only type of clubs. And then we saw more messages of Cassie. You know, she took a selfie of herself with her hair. It was half shaven and it was long on the other side, where she had asked something along the lines of whether or not her hair is good for what they normally do, presuming that they mean freak-offs. And we saw one text message of Cassie asking Diddy how he felt after a freak-off, and Diddy responds that they have to be more careful next time. Then Cassie says, kind of like agreeing, and that she has to take a test, but it's unclear what type of test she had to take after this particular freak-off. And then we see just some more text messages that show Diddy asking Cassie for a freak-off in October of 2013. Cassie responds, when? And then Diddy says, now. And then Cassie says, sure, she just has to run to the store to get some items. And we see more text messages from March 27th of 2014. Diddy says, I feel like having one of those nights, but I have to go to the studio. F. And then Cassie responds, ugh, me too. And then we see another message from January 19th of 2016 where Cassie says, you're making my heart melt, you're so loving, just really kind of those lovey-dovey messages that they wanted to kind of, I think, show the jury once again. And then we see another message from June 10th of 2017. That's a big day for me because obviously that's my birthday. But in this context, we see one particular message from Cassie asking Diddy kind of to take on this role-playing type of character, in a sense, where she's like, okay, well, the game starts at 10 p.m. What we're going to do is kind of meet at this bar or this lounge. You're not going to know me. I'm not going to know you. And you're going to pick me up, that type of thing. And then she said, even in this particular message, in case of an emergency, the safe word is pineapple. And so to your point, Jesse, I think what the defense was trying to do is really kind of show once again that she might have been a willing participant in these freak-offs, especially in even the later dates, because they even went back to the timeline from March 4th of 2016 where they see text messages between Cassie and Diddy. But the thing is that these particular messages weren't even reviewed by Alyssa Penland, who was the witness putting together all of this stuff on behalf of the government, where Cassie sends kind of this sexually explicit text message to Diddy. Then Cassie says to Diddy, baby, I want to F oh so bad. Diddy responds to Cassie, well, what would you want to do? And then again, the defense really pointing out that these texts weren't assigned to the chart. So Tenny Garagos is like, okay, well, did you decide not to include this in the chart? Alyssa Penland responds, I did not. And then Tenny Garagos is like, okay, well, who decided what to include? And this was an answer that Alyssa Penland had said throughout, that she wasn't the one to pick and choose which text messages or which exhibits were assigned. It was really just the trial team, and her role in this case was really just to make sure everything was accurate in terms of what the trial team gave her. And so really the defense kind of ended their cross-examination asking about whether or not the cops were called on March 5th of 2016, whether or not she looked over the incident reports from that time frame too. and then just kind of really ended on that message where Cassie told Carrie Morgan that she wanted to sue, and this being back in 2016 after the Intercontinental Hotel incident.
Yeah, and the defense could say, basically, at a minimum, what you're seeing, these summary charts, they're an incomplete picture of this whole relationship. There's no context. You're taking things out. You're making it look bad. Look at it in completion. Look at everything. But, look, there's a gray area. When you talk about, even aside the messages about her encouraging freak-offs or setting them up, but when you talk about the idea of she wanted, I know there's a message where she said she couldn't wait to have a baby with Sean Combs, right? Or where she expressed her love and he expressed her love. It's a gray area. It's a gray area. What happened on redirect? Prosecutors have an opportunity to question Agent Penland again. What happened there?
Yeah, so I really think the government was trying to kind of clean up every possible damage that was done under the cross-examination, given the amount of text and even just how lengthy the cross was, too, where they really kind of brought it in. And I really was kind of thinking during the redirect, why didn't they introduce this under the direct? But there might be a reason that's just unknown to me. But what we were able to see is the flight itinerary summary chart once again from August 9th of 2013, where there was kind of a stay for the Garden Inn in Long Island here in New York, and the booking was for Cassie, and then the escort, but I completely, everything went by so fast I didn't write down this particular escort's name. But what the government ended up doing was they showed a photo kind of from a couple days earlier of Cassie with this really big kind of scar, very big cut on her eyebrow, and this happened or occurred around a couple days beforehand, that being August 5th of 2013, and then Cassie wrote in a message to Diddy, so you can remember, as well as kind of sending that picture of herself where she had the really kind of deep cut and that really kind of bruised eyebrow that we all saw. And then we see messages from March 5th of 2016, where there's text messages from Diddy to Cassie. And this is before what had happened at the Intercontinental Hotel incident, where Diddy writes to Cassie, I think if we start at 7 or 8 and end at 4 at the latest, take a Xanax or an Ambien to go to sleep and we'll be okay. Then we see messages from March 10th of 2016, so a few days after the incident occurred at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles in that year, where Diddy writes to Cassie, baby, I can't say it enough, I'm sorry, with 5 exclamation points. Then Cassie responds on that same day to Diddy, I'm not a rag doll, I'm someone's child. Again, a message that we've seen prior even to today in that timeline. Then we see another message on January 7th of 2017, where Cassie writes to Diddy, nothing good comes out of FOs anymore. You treat me like Ike Turner. And this was sent after a flight was booked between Cassie and another escort. And so I think what the government was really trying to do is really say, okay, well, there was a little possible alleged coercion here because these are coming after these incidents of violence. And then you see kind of a corresponding hotel being booked, a flight happening, and then, allegedly a freak-off occurring too.
Okay, so quite an eventful day with Agent Penland, but now we're kind of previewing what's going to come next. And there is a name that we've heard a lot since the start of the Diddy saga. This is somebody who actually got arrested back in the day, right back last year when we were all wondering what was going to be happening with Sean Combs. And my understanding, this person was actually in court at the beginning of the day before Penland came on the stand. We're talking about Brendan Paul. Who is Brendan Paul? What happened at the beginning of the day? And what do you anticipate his testimony is going to be when he's called by the prosecution?
Well, honestly, Jesse, I was really hoping they'd be able to get Brendan Paul on the stand at some point today, but because of the duration of the cross-examination for Special Agent Alyssa Penland, it didn't happen. And so what we do know is that Brendan Paul was given an immunity deal in order to testify. He was subpoenaed to testify. So he comes into court earlier this morning before the jury is present, before Alyssa Penland even gets back on the stand. And what's interesting is during Brendan Paul kind of invoking his Fifth Amendment right and the judge signing off on his immunity order, Diddy wasn't in the courtroom during this. Why? Because he was actually reviewing some video exhibits in the back room with one of his defense attorneys, and so he ended up just waiving his right to be present when Brendan Paul took the stand this morning outside of the presence of the jury in order to get his immunity deal. So we didn't see that initial reaction of Brendan Paul seeing Diddy's face once again, nor did we get the reaction of Diddy seeing Brendan Paul's face once again. And so what was interesting is Brendan Paul, by the way, is very, very tall, but I think he used to play college basketball basketball, and I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But he comes
By the way,
in.
let me just tell you something. Mina Say What Lona, okay, from SiriusXM, she was on our live show today, our courtroom show. She went to school with him. She's like, I remember him. I went to Syracuse. I remember he was a basketball player.
No
She was
way.
shocked that he became part of this case.
Oh
so when
my
you
God.
said how tall he is, I was like, oh my gosh,
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And by the
it
way,
was crazy too, because
Nick,
really,
Nick,
like,
our technical director, just said he remembers watching him on TV.
Oh my God.
So there you go.
Sorry, like, wow, that really is crazy. That real everything, like, it feels like all roads kind of lead to Diddy, right? In that case. And so, yeah, Brendan Paul, he gets up on the witness stand. It seems like, obviously federal court is probably not his forte. He seemed kind of maybe a little jittery, and I might just be kind of over assuming that, but he gets on the stand and he's not even looking at Mary Slavic or Christy Slavic when she's asking him questions just about his Fifth Amendment right and his immunity order, all of that stuff. He's looking kind of in the wrong direction, but then he kind of realized, oh, okay, I think she's the one asking me these questions. Let me go ahead and answer. But it was really kind of I thought it was a big moment, especially because we've talked about him so much before on Law and Crime, that seeing him in the flesh, I'm kind of like, what is he going to testify to? But what we do know is that his direct examination is only going to be about 90 minutes. So I'm curious how they'll be able to get maybe all the juicy stuff possibly in that 90-minute time frame, and then given however long the cross-examination occurs, I feel like he'll be on the stand at least for the majority of the morning tomorrow.
Yeah, this associate, I think it's all about drugs. And remember, drugs are important because prosecutors say that Sean Combs used drugs to keep victims compliant. Possession with intent to distribute, narcotics offenses, those are part of the predicate crimes for racketeering. So obviously he plays a big role in this. And by the way, we're coming to the end of the prosecution's case, right? I mean, do we know what the rest of the week is going to look like in terms of, is anybody going to be called after Brendan Paul? We kind of have an idea about who the defense is going to call. We're coming towards the end of this.
Yes, we are coming very near towards the end. So originally the government was like, okay, maybe we're able to rest our case on Wednesday. That didn't end up happening because of just how long the cross-examination happened for Alyssa Penland today. Then they still have to squeeze in Brendan Paul. He has to do direct and cross, possibly redirects again. So that might take a good chunk of Wednesday. And then obviously we're out of court on Thursday. And so what they're going to end up doing, and I don't know how you feel about this, Jesse, but they're ending the big witness being another summary witness. And so you would think, given this kind of Hollywood type trial, that they would kind of end with a bang, but it seems for the most part that they're ending with another summary witness and then possibly more summary charts, summary exhibits. So it's not the, maybe the juiciest stuff, but it is pretty interesting because whatever the summary witness will be will really kind of tie every loose end together for the government. Then the defense case happened. And what we did learn about the defense case today, Jesse, is that Mark Agnifilo said that they plan to have anywhere between 2 to 5 trial days, getting pretty close to the very end here. And then obviously, the jury has to get the charge. There has to be jury instructions. And then somewhere in the near future, there's a light at the end of the tunnel that eventually the jury will get the case, and then eventually they'll start deliberating. So we could see that happening very, very soon. I just can't believe we're kind of near the end now. It seems like we just started, so long ago, and now we're slowly approaching the end of the government's case and the defense's case, and we'll see what happens in the possible government rebuttal case, and then eventually the jury will get the charge.
And if Sean Combs decides to take the stand, then our whole timeline changes because he would be on the stand for quite some time, both on direct and cross-examination. Look, ending with a summary witness for a complicated RICO case like this, I don't blame them doing that. I think the closing arguments are going to be a lot of charts. I think they need a lot of exhibits. I think they need to explain this as clearly as possible. Better for the prosecution, not so for the defense. If the defense says this is really, none of this matches up, it's all complicated, they haven't proven it beyond a reasonable doubt, I think for the prosecution, they have to make it as clear as possible. And sometimes having these charts, these visual cues, these visual aids for the jury to understand the different elements and how they all match up and how the evidence matches up, it makes sense. They talk about a summary witness. Usually it's kind of like an investigator, an agent, a paralegal. Could a summary witness be Christina Coram, who we've been talking about so much as this former chief of staff who's been mentioned by, I don't know, every single witness? We all thought that she was going to take the stand. We all thought she was going to be called, but she's not right? As far as we know, any indication, Elizabeth, that Christina Coram is going to be this summary witness? I don't think so, right?
Nope. It doesn't seem like Christina Coram will be the summary witness, because even that might take the rest of the case up until next week. So unfortunately, we're not going to hear from KK when the government presents their case.
But they were able to present a lot of her messages, and maybe whatever value they have in that is why they didn't ultimately call her. Elizabeth Millner, thank you so much. Great reporting, as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.